Hey everyone, what's up? And welcome back to another episode of the Crushing Small Stakes PLO course. In today's lesson, we're going to learn more about pre-flop strategy and we're going to focus ourselves on how to respond correctly when facing a tight 4-bet. Whenever we face a 4-bet pre-flop, it highly depends on what our opponent's 4-betting range is on how to respond correctly. If we look into a GTO 4-betting range, this one is extremely balanced and it has a good mix of like strong value heavy hands in there as well as some bluffs. But if we think about how people are actually playing, especially at low stakes, then people are quite often very linearly. And in other words, they are extremely leaning towards aces, high pairs, and they don't really add in enough of these bluffs basically. So today, this will be the topic. We're going to compare our GTO response versus a response that is more realistic, and we're going to look at what we can learn from this. First things first, let's see what the setting of today will be. We're going to learn more about small blind versus button today. Hero, which is us, is sitting in the small blind. We 3-bet against the button steal. The button comes over the top with the 4-bet, and the action is back to us. Now, for the sake of this episode, I ran a new sim where I adjusted the 4-betting range for the button. So let's look first into that, what I did. So the button 4-betting range, I removed the GTO bluffs from this range. So for example, the obvious 9, Jack 9, 8, 7 double suited, for example, and many other double suited rundowns that belong in there, as well as some pairs that are utilized as a 4-bet bluff there. And I made the range basically more linear and less polarized. I put there in the best aces, or basically all the aces in the 4-betting range. I put in the best high pairs in the 4-betting range, and I also added in some of the very best double-suited rundowns that do have an ace. I think this range is pretty realistic to what people are playing in reality. Some people are even tighter, only 4-betting aces. There is also a good amount of people who also 4-bet some high pairs, for example, and some of these rundowns. So I think this is a pretty good starting point and will give us a good idea of how to respond correctly when your opponent is 4-betting a tight range. What I also did is I removed the fold versus 5-bet. So if our opponent 4-bets and we put the money in, I removed his option to fold. So he's always calling there. And I think that also makes a lot of sense what people are playing. Okay, so first things first, let's compare GTO versus this actual simulation and get a good understanding of the overall strategy here. So in the GTO setting, as you can see here in the first row, when the button comes over the top for a 4-bet, we are supposed to fold 38% of the time in the small blind. We are calling 33% and 5-betting, basically putting everything all in 29% of the time. Now, if we adjust that 4-betting range by the button, our response is actually going to shift dramatically. As you can see here, we're now supposed to fold 67% suddenly, so much, much more. We're only calling 11% and 5-betting 22%. Okay, so this is a good starting point to get an understanding of the overall range play. Now let's look a little bit deeper into the second row here. So this is the actual result here. We're going to break it down step by step. So if our opponent is 4-betting a tight range, if we hold aces, we're always 5-betting in this situation and we're always going all in here. If our opponent, again, is 4-betting a tight range here and we have other high pairs, what I mean by this is 10s, jacks, queens, and kings here, we are almost always folding 98% of the time and we're only calling 2%. Low pairs, deuces until nines, folding 79% and calling 21. Keep in mind, these are the hands that we did 3-bet. Unpaired double suited ace high rundowns here, folding 96% of the time, calling only 4%. Unpaired double suited hands without an ace, folding 8% and calling 92%. So a big, big difference here when it comes to the strategy, whether or not we have that ace with our double suited rundown. And all the other unpaired hands that we did decide to go for a 3-bet, they are folding 96% and calling 4%. Okay, so these are the ranges. Now let's zoom a little bit more in and get a good understanding of the paired situations here, like our range when we have a pair after facing a 4-bet. As mentioned, aces always being 5-bet, but let's look at the other high pairs, so 10s until kings here. As I said earlier, they are folding 98% of the time and only calling 2%. And although You could simplify it to just fold all of them. There is a specific group of hands that is actually calling here. Let me highlight it. These are the double paired, double suited, and extremely well connected high pairs. So the range starts at 10, 10, 7, 7 at the bottom and goes up all the way to King, King, Queen, Queen double suited, meaning all the hands in between here are also able to call. So for example, Jack, Jack, 9, 9 double suited, King, King, 10, 10 double suited, like these hands also are called. But whenever the hand is more disconnected, you are supposed to let it go. As a comparison, in a GTO setting, this subgroup of hands, so the high pairs in a GTO simulation, this group of hand would be called 15% and even shoved 14%. So you can see the difference already here. There's no shoving anymore, and there's almost always going to be a fold here. So very, very different. Now let's look in the low pairs, so deuces until nines here, that we did, however, to go for a 3-bet, now face a 4-bet. These hands are folding 79% of the time, calling 21. If we look at the hands here, there are some specific, they have some specific characteristics again, starting at 5, 6, 6, 7 double suited, all the way down to Jack, Jack, 10, 9 double suited. So the extremely connected one pair holdings that are double suited, they are capable of calling. If you look at the double paired hands that are double suited, they starts at 6, 6, deuce, deuce, all the way to 9, 9, 8, 8 double suited. So everything in between there, as long it has connection that a straight would be possible, these combinations are good enough to call. And also even some single suited double paired hands are good enough if they are connected. 5, 5, 3, 3, all the way down to 8, 8, all the way up to 8, 8, 7, 7, basically. Okay, so this is an overview of the paired here. If we compare this again to the GTO results here, you can see in the GTO setting, it's pretty much different again. Same what we saw with the high pairs. So here we can see that 44% would be a call and shove 5%. So much more continuing here. So if your opponent has a tight range, in reality happens a lot, then you should fold a lot more. Let's look at the unpaired hands as well here. So unpaired double suited ace high hands. 96% of the time you are supposed to fold if your opponent is extremely tight when it comes to 4-betting and calling 4%. I would simplify this to just fold all of these combinations. Don't make it too hard on yourself. The difference between having an ace or not having an ace is dramatically, and this will simplify your strategy a lot. So fold this one, and if we compare this to a GTO setting, the difference is very, very large. 50% of the time we're calling in a GTO setting, but we're basically never calling if our opponent is very tight. And I think this is especially one of those categories that people play very different here. They are continuing too often, much more leaning towards the GTO call frequency than what we're actually supposed to do is fold almost all of them. And that is because the ace isn't really valuable to us because our opponent is either having ace-ace or another ace-x hand that is very often dominating us with a higher in there as well. And therefore, the ace doesn't really help us. It's not really a good out for us. If you look at the reverse, so double suited rundown that we did decide to 3-bet without an ace, you can see the opposite. We're basically always calling, almost never folding. So simplify just this to always call. The unpaired other hands, 96% of the time we are folding. So these are the rare single suited rundowns that we did decide to come over, that we did decide to 3-bet basically. Again, simplify just to just always fold because we will be dominated almost always here. In a GTO setting, again, very different. We are actually calling there 35% of the time, but now you can see that we are supposed to fold almost all of them. So keep that in mind, especially the differences between a GTO outcome and how many players are 4-betting in reality. This is a big, big difference. Okay, let's look at some takeaways of today's lessons, guys. If we look back at what we've just learned, we can see that we should be much tighter against a more linear 4-betting range. So if your opponent is extremely value heavy, almost always only 4-betting aces, a couple of other high pairs and high rundowns, basically, we should be extremely tight here. When we have a pair in our hand, we're 5-betting aces. We are calling high pairs only when double paired and strongly connected. We learned that before. Also low pairs when double paired or strongly connected. There's a little bit more room there to call a couple of more hands with the low pairs. And if we look at the unpaired hands, we can see that we are folding unpaired double suited hands if we do have an ace, which has a massive difference when it comes to GTO outcomes. We're calling unpaired double suited hands without an ace, and we're basically folding all the rest. So pretty big differences here when it comes to what type of forwarding range we are facing. One additional side note I want to make is I also looked into like a button cutoff scenario, and the outcomes there are very, very similar. So if your opponent on the cutoff is four betting you when you sit on the button and he's four betting very tight there, then you can basically use this strategy there as well. It's very, very similar. Don't make it too hard on yourself and just use the same principles and ideas that we talked about today. That's going to be it. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, take care, good luck, and I will see you next week with another episode here of the Crushing Small Stake PLO course.